It's now 4:30. I'm going to call the August 26, 2014 meeting of the Moorhead Public Service Commission to order. Could I have a motion, please, concerning the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Could I also have a similar motion concerning the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Is there any second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Are there any customers to be heard? Seeing none. William, any recognitions that you want to make this evening?
No, not this evening.
That's easy. Any old business, Mr. Schwant?
Nope.
Members of the City Council. Hi,
Hello,
Heidi.
gentlemen. Yeah, I have a couple things I just wanted to mention. A couple weeks ago, City Council met and discussed our preliminary budget, and the streetlight utility fee came up, and some council members had some questions about how the utility fees for current streetlights are calculated, and what is the city charged, and why is the city charged a certain amount. So Bill, if you haven't received those questions yet, they're probably on their way. Some council members directed city staff to ask you for more information on what that breakdown is and what that looks like.
Okay.
And then, what else? Yeah, just the preliminary budget. There were some questions about the new, not even new because we haven't agreed to it, but the proposed or the, not even proposed, the idea of the kilowatt per hour came up, and that was discussed a little bit, but it has not been ironed out or hashed out with the transfer group yet. So, but that was part of the preliminary budget. I just thought I would bring that to all of your attention.
Well, there are those of us sitting up here who are placing a great deal of faith in that whole transfer group in hopes that we can arrive at some kind of negotiated number.
I do too.
For forthcoming years, and I hope that that works out. Anything further, Heidi?
Nope, that's all I got.
Okay. Members of the Public Service Commission, anything to report? Les?
Yesterday at 11:45, the Economic Development Authority met, and we received an update briefing on construction projects in progress and road everything, traffic lights and everything from Bob Zimmerman, city engineer. Very, very, very useful information. A couple of the things that are on the horizon, and I believe City Council has already discussed it, the work on 20th Avenue south, or 20th Street south of 30th Avenue has been moved up at least 1 year, and right now is tentatively in the 2015 budget in preparation for taking traffic off 40th Avenue south when the I-94 Highway 75 work starts in 2016. That information is probably online, and City, Heidi is nodding yes, that information's online on the city, so if you're interested, go out and take a look.
Okay. Anything further? Rolf?
Yep, there's a quick update, I think, on the budget discussions. If you saw the Committee of the Whole, as Heidi mentioned, there was a preliminary budget presented. The number, I think, ended up to be, of the transfers, ended up to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $6.7 million. We have not discussed that number yet in our group, so we're looking forward to the next meeting. But I just want to let you guys know that as this group here, from a budget perspective, if the 6.7 were agreed, that would be an increase of over $700,000 over last year. I watched the committee as a whole afterwards, and it's almost sounded like the increase was only going to be 173, but actually it's about $700,000 increase. So that is something we would have to discuss in this group. If we agree to that request, and I'll talk about why I'm wording it this way in a second here, that may mean an additional 2.5% to 3% increase in electric fees, in addition to what we need to do for the Red Rock hydro dam. That's another 2% on top of that. So we just need to be aware of it, that the city has a need that is higher than what our expected net revenue will be. I think our net revenue right now was expected at about 6 million, 6.2 maybe. This would be at 6.7, so we would have to have a discussion on that one. And because it is higher than the expected net revenue, there would have to be some sort of an agreement, and Heidi alluded to it. We even talked about a different way of calculating or getting to that number through a kilowatt hour calculation. So I just want to bring this to your attention. Nothing has been discussed yet. All we know is there was a preliminary budget a week and a half ago from the city. Dave and I are aware of that, obviously, and we'll try to set up the next transfer group or the budget group meeting as quickly as we can to decide what is possible, what is needed. But again, for us, if this came in at that number in the end, it would be probably 2.5, right, Bill? 2.5 to 3%. That's about the $700,000 would be 2.5 to 3% increase, wouldn't it?
Oh, let's see.
Because I think it's almost 1% per every 250,000,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
So that's, as everybody is aware, we don't know what the number is going to be yet, but, you know.
Yeah, we'll have to look at those
report back.
numbers.
We'll report back.
Yeah. And I've got a few more things to say under the budget item that we'll maybe talk a little bit about. That
Okay,
might
if I can ask-
might complicate that as well, so.
Okay.
Okay, the question that I have, and I'll direct it to you, Heidi. My understanding is that there's also some talk about an inflation factor being added to the city's budget for our transfer.
Yeah, there was a 3%, the proposal is to add a 3% inflation adjustment to the transfer, which was something that was pretty new to us.
Okay, so your committee has not discussed any of this,
No.
or inflation factors?
I hadn't heard anything about inflation. I'd heard about realistic annual growth factor being a part of the new total.
I would assume that the term realistic is in the mind of the beholder. If I,
You know, what I can say is that it was very preliminary.
okay.
And, you know, we still, as a transfer group, have discussions and have work to do.
You know, one of the things that concerns me, and I don't know, I'll sort of put it to both of you, we know that every fall we have budget discussions, and we are rapidly getting to the point where September will be next week, and we know that what follows September. Are we going to be able to have continued and meaningful discussions in a way that we can complete this process prior to the end of the year? I mean,
Well,
let's start.
It has to be completed.
Okay.
Right? I mean, it has to be completed. How we get to the number, I don't know. And again, we haven't met as a group. So the number we saw last Monday was a number we had not seen before. But again, like as Heidi said, it was preliminary budget put together by the city. And again, we're all fully aware that the city does need funds. There's no question about it. The question is where the funds coming from. And again, if we agree to an increase like that, what would that mean to our ratepayers?
Okay.
And not only the ratepayers, but also to the other things we need to do, you know, like run a utility.
Yep.
So, Dave?
David?
I guess I would only suggest that, you know, it's been a brief summer. Everyone is squeezing a lot of the last efforts of the summer into what was really a very short season. So I think I'm confident that once we get beyond Labor Day or beyond the last trip of the year that is occurring over the Labor Day week, then we'll have everybody in the room and we're going to be able to get this done. So,
Good.
yeah.
I hope that's the case.
I think it's just summer. I really do. We'll all be there. We'll get
That
it done.
short brief period between pre-winter and winter?
Yeah. Well, really, especially this year. Yeah.
But also, we may as well, this is not going to be an easy discussion, right? This is going to be a tough discussion for all parties involved. So this is not going to be, let's get together and 2 hours later we have it hammered out. There's needs on both sides and we need to discuss them. But I'm confident we can. And at the end of the day, at the end of the year, there has to be a budget. And there will be a transfer as part of the budget, and we'll get to it.
That's our job.
It's
Okay.
our job.
Okay? Yes, John?
Just maybe Heidi, you could explain this to me. So what I'm hearing is that the city tells the public service what their allocation has to be, and then public services budget has to meet that request?
I'd like to hear the answer to that in a palatable form, please.
I I would like to start off by saying the transfer working group was created to try to give more, what's the word I'm looking for? Transparency and to be more predictable. Because there were people who felt like that's how it worked, that the city would say, we want this much money and this is what we're going to take. And there were times where it had gone even above that, above and beyond what was initially requested. So the purpose of the transfer group was to get a group together that could try to hash out an agreement and a plan and a design to avoid that and to try to be much more open and much more transparent and a much more cohesive group, so that it didn't appear to be, that type of relationship. But, I mean, I can see how it looks like that, but I hope that there are conversations that were taking place, and so it wasn't just this is what we're taking, and this is what we want, this is what we need, this is what you need to give us. We don't want it to be like that. This transfer group is working to try to get rid of that type of relationship.
I think that's one of the best answers I heard to that question in a long time, Heidi. Thank you for that. I think, John, since you're the newest member here, a careful reading of the city charter would provide in Chapter 7 that each department of the city is to provide preliminary budget information to the city, and that the utilities under the control or under the jurisdiction of the Public Service Commission are to provide a tentative budget as well to the city, so that the city can then do whatever they have to do. So I would suggest the reading of Chapter 7, dealing with the city's budgeting process, and the reference to our preliminary and tentative budget, as well as those chapters. I think it's Chapter 11 deals with the subject of and 12 deals with the subject of our Public Service Commission, that makes it very clear that the city has the authority to take a certain percentage each year from our various budgets, from our net revenue, which is the key term. There is some discussion going back and forth as to the interpretation of all of those terms, but no, it's not a situation where we simply are told how much it has to be. We have the obligation of operating a utility, and they have an obligation of setting a rather complex budget themselves, and we're trying to get both bodies together to realize each of our needs so we can make it as palatable as possible. Is that accurate? Does that answer your question? You posed the $64,000 question for those of us old enough to remember that.
And 2 days, 2 days.
I've been asking this for 26 years, so, and I still won't have it right, so, okay. Does that take care of you? Okay. Anybody else on the commission have anything to comment on? Brings us to the general manager, Mr. Schwant.
Yeah, there's a few items on the general manager's report. One is a report on the legislative session, the unsession they called it, I guess. And if you want to take a look at that, you sure can. There actually was an omnibus energy bill that was passed, although it really wasn't that monumental as far as how it affected municipal utilities. One thing that we'll continue to watch is solar laws that are being changed in Minnesota to encourage the development of solar and the use of solar. So we're keeping an eye on that. A lot of it has to do with who's going to back it up when the sun isn't shining, and how is that going to be paid for. So there is going to be quite a bit of discussion over the next few years, because there is going to be a lot of solar developed over the next few years. We're not in the prime solar area, a little bit further south and west of us is, but still there's a lot of solar that's going to be in this area in this country. So,
Quick question on that. At some point, it would be great to have an update on the solar garden to see where that's going. And then the other question on the renewable side of things, does our 50% WAPA count into that, or do they not count that at all?
they do not count it. It's a very good question, because it is renewable.
Yep.
Typically, for the use of renewable energy, they talk about large hydro versus small hydro. Small hydro counts, so the new Red Rock counts, but large hydro, like the WAPA, doesn't count. So I can't remember exactly where the cutoff is, but, it's like, a certain number of megawatts is small and others is large, so.
So if there were a mandate coming down, you would not include the water piece?
Right. And right now, the requirement is on our power suppliers, so it's MRES that has to comply with that. So they actually produce the solar, produce the wind. They may locate it in an area, but it probably isn't going to be in Moorhead because we're not in that prime solar area. They're actually, Missouri River Energy Services is looking at a solar project where they would install many, of these units. And it would probably be they're looking at like the southern edge of their tier, which is like Pierre, South Dakota, all the way into Iowa. So there's much more sun there, sadly. So, but that's just a little bit of an update on the legislative session. But you can read that on your own. Thanks.
Anything further?
Not under the general manager report.
Okay. That brings us down to item 9, which is to approve the grant application to the Minnesota Department of Health for well televising of the North Buffalo aquifer wells. Chris, are you going to be speaking to this?
Chris Knutson, Water Division Manager. I'll just give a little bit of background first on this item. For the past 5 years or so, the Department of Health has made available funds from the Clean Water and Land Legacy Amendment, and we've actually used about $60,000 of those funds for grants related to wellhead protection. This year, actually, on the South Buffalo Aquifer well field, we've done about $30,000 of improvements related to updating some of the reliability factors for that infrastructure. This proposed grant application is actually looking at the North Buffalo wells, which are about 30 years old and starting to kind of show some age. So we're going to do some condition assessment as part of this grant and actually look at the well casing to examine it and see if there's any outstanding maintenance items that need to be completed up there. So that's the intention of the grant.
Okay. Any questions? What are you anticipating?
I expect it to be in better condition than what we encountered at the South Buffalo wells.
Let's hope so.
Yeah, we encountered quite a few items that weren't necessarily anticipated down there, but so I hope it's in good condition. But part of condition assessment is doing some proactive planning and budget, identifying any future budget items that we would need to address down there. So
It was quite surprising when we took our tour recently, the condition of those wells and the equipment, which is almost prehistoric. And,
Yeah.
that needs some attention.
So how deep are those wells? How deep?
about 100 feet, So they're very shallow when it comes to well depths. So the Moorhead aquifer is about 260 feet deep there, so pretty stark comparison. So we'll essentially, it's just dropping a video camera down and looking at that casing. If you find cracks or other things, it's just areas for contamination, if it was present, to enter that casing and then subsequently be pumped to the water treatment plant. So and then you can find any other damaged items as part of that assessment as well.
And this would be a pure grant, no matching funds from us, just we get some money to have it done, right?
Yeah, so we've done two different styles of grants for this funding. One is what's called a competitive grant, and one is an implementation grant. This would actually be an implementation grant, and so there's no matching funds. We expend the funds, and then we're reimbursed by the state. We just completed the implementation grant for the South Buffalo wells just a few weeks ago, so now we're going to go request some more money for this funding period, which opens up in September. We actually used the competitive grants for some security upgrades at the South Buffalo wells this year. We'll be looking at another competitive grant in the near future. Probably in September, we'll come back with another application for that as well.
Okay.
By the way, a totally unrelated point here. I just had my tankless water heater serviced, and I said, so do I have to de-lime it once a year? And I said, well, you would if you live in West Fargo, but because you live in Moorhead, you only have to do it every 2 years. So congrats to you and the guys and everybody for the water.
Oh, thank you.
I was being nice.
I understand that.
We were all taking it in.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a rare occurrence. I was just taking advantage of it and just soaking it in. Okay, could I have
Mr.
a,
Chair, I move to approve item 9.
thank you, Mr. Bakke. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the same sign. That motion carries. I'd like to go to item 10, which is to approve the criteria for the general service classification, which is sort of a hot-button issue here in Moorhead. And a number of us commissioners have had calls from customers of Moorhead Public Service. How are we going to fix this?
Well, let me direct you to our recommendation and to the agenda item. And I'm actually going to be speaking off of the bullets on the second page of 3, so 2 of 3, where it says key issues, because I think it does a pretty good job of outlining what it is we're talking about. There was an electric rate study that was completed in 2013. The electric rate study typically is, we call them cost of service studies, because what you do is you try and equitably create rates that will have an equitable charge to all the customers in different classes, make sure that we're paying for our purchase power and our distribution system in an appropriate way. The study made some changes, which they always do. I mean, we do these every 5 years, and it made some changes to some different classes. And some of the customers that were moved from our small general service class to our large general service class, experienced some increases in rates that were more than what we anticipated. And therefore, what the recommendation is going to be is to, change the criteria just a bit. That will take care of most of the customer issues. And then there's still, even with those changes in the criteria, there's still a few customers that need some phasing in so that they don't experience a large increase in any one year. Because we do tend to try and phase these in over a period of time. And when they're phased in over a period of time, of course, people have time to adjust. We obviously did get customers' attention, and we did get some calls on that. We've talked to many of those customers. Dennis has done a nice job of talking to customers as well, and we're working through some of those issues, trying to make sure they get their efficiency up, and and of course we did get their attention. What the customers would experience then, if you approve this, would be many of them, well, all of one that you've heard from would actually get a credit this year, a sizable credit, and then we would also phase some in over the next few years. So anyway, so that's kind of a summary, and I'm sure there's some questions, so I'll answer
There may
those
be
as
even
well.
a few disagreements with that, but
Yeah, that's
David?
Bill, your point about allowing the customers time to adjust and such, and this probably goes to Dennis too. It seems, by my reading of the material, that it might be that we can do more to help educate or teach or help in that adjustment. I'm wondering how many of our customers, really knew what to do, other than that, they're in a different rate class. They didn't do anything different than they've done before. They turned on the lights, they turned on the machinery, they did whatever they used to do, and really didn't. There wasn't really an adjustment. And obviously there's material and there's good advice and such, but are we doing everything we can to help those that are going to stay in this new category? Everything we can to help them through that adjustment so that they really have the opportunity to make those adjustments, to maybe reinvest in what they have in equipment or whatever. What is it that makes it palatable so that when we flip them from this category into this category, that they're just not left to their own devices to figure it out.
Well, actually, we've probably taken a step backwards in that, you know, in the education of all these customers, because 80% of the group that were having the trouble, 80% of that group are moved back to the small general service. So really, they're moving back to where they were before.
Okay.
So that issue for 80% of them is gone. Now, the group that you're talking about is the 20% that are probably the larger ones. They probably don't have as good of a, it's called a load factor in the electric industry. Their demand is high, their energy usage is low. That's how we're billed. So it is more equitable to somehow capture that. And on those customers, that's where we would do the phasing in. And Dennis has worked with and will continue to work with those customers. They'll be trying to get their demand down, and we change it to an average demand. The reason why 80% of them went back into this small group is the classification changed from, if you hit 25 kW any time in the year, any month of the year, you're put in the general service class. We changed it to, you have to be on an average basis be above 25 kW. So that took 80% of the issue away. But there are some that are going to be above that 25 on an average basis. However, we expect, now that they've seen what the rates are going to be, even though they're going to be phased in, they're going to have a big incentive to get that demand down. And I think a lot of them will. And then Dennis will be working with them, because we'll be able to tell if they've got a demand that's under 25. Then we'll make sure and work with them to get them in the small general service category, which really, from the standpoint of demand and energy, they won't have to even understand much about demand, because they'll just be charged on energy. We'll keep track of the demand, and if they go above the 25, of course, they move again back up into general service. But, we deal with, 2,500 commercial customers, and we're talking about 20 of them. So we're talking about a very small group of customers that we're dealing with here.
If I understand the way you explained this to me previously, there's a ratcheting effect. If the demand of the customer reaches a certain point, and we were just previously, when our consultants talked to us, if they hit that point at any time during the year, they stayed there.
Right.
Even though their utilization was quite low, they still stayed at this new demand level, even if they didn't ever hit it again during the year. Personally, I have a problem with that concept because of the fact that we are owned by our customers, and I feel they should pay for the widgets that they buy from us. But I don't think we should ratchet them up and take advantage of that situation to the extent that we are making them to pay for that whole amount if they just get ratcheted into that position. That may be comfortable for the electric industry. I don't think it would be comfortable for the business people in Moorhead. And I think we have to remember that we work for them, not the other way around. To that extent, you made a comment about the people who, I think that this change in our system also was an unintended consequence, or had unintended consequences, at least as far as some of us are concerned. To that extent, I feel like we have been using our customers' money for a certain period of time. I would feel uncomfortable with a concept under which they get a credit. I think that they should be rebated the amount that they should not have been charged, or that we feel uncomfortable with charging them. But that's just my feeling. And there are certain customers out there, no matter how much you try to, I'm not going to say appease, but try to straighten out the problem, which is a good thing about having this body here. If we recognize that there is a problem, we can go to it and try to fix the problem as quickly as possible. But I feel that we have to be receptive to our customers to that extent. Anybody else? So where do we go with this, and what action are we to take?
Well, if you take this action, I mean, you're basically authorizing us to change the criteria. Like I say, it covers 80% of the issues. And then also included in here is the latitude for management to work with that other 20% in order to credit them back, and then phase in over the next few years those rates and work with them as well to make sure.
Well, let me ask you, should that other 20% actually be going up to the higher category?
Well, those 20% will go up to that higher category based on this new criteria.
I understand that. So what I'm asking is, should the criteria even be changed differently from what you're proposing?
I don't think that would be wise. I mean, you do a rate study, you do a cost of service study in order to make sure there's equity among the classes. Some of these.
But our cost of service study also resulted in an unintended consequence.
Well, the only thing that probably was missed was a phasing in of some of that. So, I mean, we'll eventually get there, and for these 20% and maybe some of the other ones that change their utilization, they will be affected by if they have an extremely low load factor, because it does cost us money from our power supplier to serve that. And also, it's a different strain on the distribution system. So, I mean, we'll look at it again in 5 years when we do the next cost of service study. But I think what we've got devised here is appropriate for what we want to accomplish.
Okay. Does anybody else have less?
I know you can't tell us what particular business fall into these categories, but can you give a general description of a high-demand peak business? Would it be gas stations? Would it be?
It could be. I mean, if you look at the, say, the old industrial park in Moorhead, there's a lot of, there's a lot of shops there that have, that basically everybody's out doing their work, they're doing siding or they're doing, whatever, and then they come in at certain times, hottest days, and they have an air conditioner there that they flip on one afternoon a week when it's really hot, and they just say, we got to get out of the heat. And so it doesn't run all week, but they run it one afternoon, and that would be a perfect example of a high demand and very low energy use. And so the system has to be sized in order to make sure that that works. So that would probably be a good example of one. Another one would be, and we had this in the old industrial park again, was a new manufacturer that did some kind of hardening of steel. And again, they use a lot of energy, or they use a lot of demand, so once they flip that piece of equipment on, all the lights go dim in the neighborhood, and they're using a lot of juice, but they use it for an hour a week. And so if you don't charge them a demand charge, you're not capturing the cost that you've got in the system in order to provide it. So that's a couple of examples of.
Okay, so Dennis, and you are working with these businesses and suggesting other times of the day they might do their demand, if possible.
Yeah,
if
and
possible.
if
And
possible.
I understand, it's 90 degrees out. It's 90 degrees out. You can't do much about that.
Yeah.
But sometimes scheduling can make a difference too.
Oh, yeah. Well, and then even, I know one business is, listening to Dennis's recommendations, they're putting in energy efficient lighting. They're redoing their roof, which is going to increase the R value tremendously, so they don't have to, use as much air conditioning. So, I mean, there's things that they can do that will help.
And we're working with them
Yep.
on those. Thank you.
Yep.
What kind of a response were you getting from these businesses?
Well, Dennis, I don't know if you have any answers to that. I mean, we've been talking to them. I mean, I think they're anticipating what is going to happen tonight. I think when we talk to them tomorrow and we say, here's what we're doing for you, I think they're going to be very, very appreciative.
Okay. So I'd ask the members of the commission, if we do this and we go along with this, do you think we should be in the form of a rebate or a credit? I feel lonely. Les?
What was the effective date
Of
of
the,
the change?
we would go back to January 1st.
It was, the rate change took place on January 1?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
And we would go back to January
so we're
1.
looking at 8-9 months.
Yep. And in some cases, it's probably
Fairly-
$200-300 a month.
Fairly significant increase per
Yeah.
month.
So so it could be a couple $1,000s to a small business.
I'm not, I don't care whether it be a rebate or a credit.
Okay.
You asked the question, doesn't matter.
I'd be more inclined to a rebate than a credit, just to get it done in this year, just, you know, so that we're not carrying into the next year with credits that are going to go into the next fiscal year, calendar year. So I'd just soon get it done.
Is a rebate a big item for us to do administratively, or is it pretty easy?
I don't think it would be terribly to.
I wouldn't suspect it'd be much more complicated than a credit, would it? Probably
we'll
less.
just- We'll just do,
And I assume that the amount is not a cash flow issue,
no.
right? Yeah, I'd say let's go with the rebate in that case.
Yep.
Mr. Rogala?
Then, oh, go ahead.
Thinking from the business side, if it's already an expense that has been incurred, to get it back and then reapply it seems a little bit cumbersome, but to solve the discussion, and maybe more work for staff, but give them an option to get the rebate or just to continue with it on their account.
Like that, too.
Yeah, we could do that.
Spoken as a true accounting person.
Really was.
Not an account.
You are in my mind.
You're as close as we're getting right now, right?
Closer than any of the rest of us.
Okay. Could I have a motion concerning this matter, please?
I
think-
move to accept item, what is this, 10?
Yes, sir.
And provide the affected customers the option of a rebate or a credit.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the same sign. Thank you. Item 11, the preliminary 2015 strategic planning and budget timetable, appoint the budget committee, set date for water and electric rate hearings. I'm assuming our budget committee is still willing to serve since we're in the middle of,
I would love to if there's a chance.
Sure.
see, I knew they would love to, yeah. So it was either that or the tar and the feathers.
Tar and feathers.
Yeah. So, Bill, what have you got to say about all this? You indicated when Ms. Durand was speaking that you had a few comments you'd like to make.
I do. So yeah, this item, is the same item that we typically give out every year. And what we've been doing is, this is report number 1, and then you'll see a report number 2, report number 3. So you can insert this into your budget binder if you want. And we're fairly descriptive in how we go through our budget here. So we keep you up to date on things. We do have to make sure we set the water and electric rate hearing, which is a Wednesday, I believe, right, Casey? A little different. It's always tough to work around the conflicts with other meetings that are occurring in this room. Anyway, this is report number 1. It basically goes back and talks about what the commission has done, what the committee has done. Of course, the committee's been very active with the transfer working group of the city, really since right after we did the budget last year in October, and we kind of completed our work. The working group started, and it's been working. We've had 10 meetings of that working group over the last 10 months, basically. So on average, 1 meeting a month. And they have been difficult to schedule, as you heard earlier. We go into a lot of detail on page 2 of 4, talking about the general fund transfer and the capital improvement fund transfer. And it's always an education process. Now we have a new commissioner. And so we've already talked a little bit about some of the charter provisions and the history of the transfer. It's good to know about this because this makes up over 20% of our expenses. And so we do talk about that quite a bit. There is an economic development fund transfer as well. So we've the last couple of years been very diligent in, you can see there's 4 different sections there of the transfer, and we describe that pretty well. And that will take up some of our discussion. On page 2, purchase power. We get our power from basically 2 sources. We also generate a little bit in town here, but we have Western Area Power Administration, which is the federal hydro projects along the Missouri River. Those are generally less expensive resources. And then our more expensive resources, which the WAPA is capped, so we can't get any more of that hydropower. So all of our supplemental power comes from Missouri River Energy Services. And Missouri River Energy Services, I serve on its board, and I'm also the chair of the finance committee down there, and we meet monthly. So I get to kind of hear kind of what's on the radar. And as we've been talking about transmission issues recently, and we've talked about Red Rock Hydroelectric Project, earlier I talked to you about a 2 mil increase from Missouri River over the next not over the next 3 years, 2 mils each year for the next 3 years. And that's about a 3.5% increase from Missouri River Energy Services. Divide that in two, it's about 1.75% increase. And the 2 is because we get roughly 50% of our power from Western Area Power and 50% from Missouri River. So 3.5%, 3.5%, 3.5% is what they were looking at. Well, with these transmission changes that Western Area Power, took, I mean, they went into the Southwest Power Pool just this year. It's anticipated that's going to increase our transmission costs from our purchase power portion of our expenses, and it could be significant, and it could start next year. And I won't have the amount until probably next month, but because I'm chair of the committee, Tom Heller called me and said, here's what we're looking at, here's what it could be. And so we were talking about 3.5%. It likely will be more than double that for next year. So that is a big increase in our purchase power expenses. And
Would you go back to that more than double that comment?
yeah, so 3.5%. So it could be more than 7% increase from Missouri River
Next year?
next year, because of what happened this year on WAPA going into the Southwest Power Pool. And we knew there'd be some impacts, and I've been talking about those impacts.
That's not loud enough.
We just don't know how significant it is.
So if we're at 7%, that's a 3.5% rate increase for us,
Right.
for
Before
our
we talk
customers.
about anything else.
Before we talk about whatever number the city council has mentioned transfer-wise,
Right.
and before we add on Red Rock.
No, this includes Red Rock.
Okay.
So the 3.5,
So we're still looking at a possibility of 3.5 just from them.
right, just 3.5 for Red Rock, and then an additional 3.5, maybe more, for transmission issues that are changing.
But for a rate increase, it would be half that, so it would be 3.5%
Right.
on rate, but that's more than we expected. But we anticipate that at some point.
Yeah.
Do we have any way to use, we've talked about this, maybe not the right time yet to talk about it, but we've always talked about, is there a way for us to use some reserves to buffer the impact? We've always talked about, what if there's a 10% increase coming mid-year, can we use some of the reserves? But I know they're low at this point. We need to talk about this, Dave, at the budget meeting for sure.
Yeah.
How many days in reserves are we sitting on? Do we have that number?
Mark, do you know?
Mark, do you know?
On the electric side, I think we were about a 120 days. Yeah.
Okay.
So 127.
In the
would-
past, we've used those reserves as a form of a rate stabilization type of an account so that we don't pass on those huge bumps that you're talking about. But are we,
It's, we'll talk about it at the budget committee, but you're still going to have an issue because if they're raising their rates by, say, 7%, which is, and then they're going to raise it 3.5 and 3.5. If you don't go the whole 7, you've got to go past 3.5. You'd have to go to make up, like 6. And then the next year you'd have to do a 4.5 or, well,
and
we
presumably
do half of that.
20% of that would go to the city.
Well, it depends on how the transfer is, but yeah, technically they could, yeah.
Right,
Technically they could. So that's definitely going to be an issue to talk about.
yeah.
Because that doesn't include, if we do those 2 increases, if they were increased for the city, if there's an increase, or when there's an increase from MRES, that doesn't include any increases on our part. For example, Oakport, if we
Right.
want to do anything in Oakport, coming up here in 15, any of the replacements on the infrastructure that we may have to do on the electrical side, that's going to be an issue. Okay.
Right. So that's what I was talking about for Missouri River. And, we had an idea last year that this may come up, because I remember on the finance committee, at Missouri River, we discussed this. We didn't know the size of it, so they didn't want to increase preliminarily. I actually recommended that, because you could kind of see that something like this was coming, and we did talk about this here. Because there's transmission changes that are happening, and they're going to continue to happen, and it's putting more upward pressure on us versus like XL or even the municipal utilities that are east of us in MISO. So we're technically in the Southwest Power Pool area because we're served out of the WAPA substation, and there's going to be probably more upward pressure there than there is in MISO. And that means that our rates are going to go up a little higher relative to anyone that's in MISO. XL is in MISO. Otter Tail is in MISO. So.
And do we believe that that transmission increase will be a one-time charge, or, I mean, one-time increase and then, of course, continues on, or do you think there's another increase coming after that?
Well, the Red Rock one, the 2
Yeah,
mil,
yeah.
those two were already planned. So there's 3 years right there of increases from MRES. They really don't go too much beyond that from a solid standpoint. They would tell you, well, we're hoping that's good for a while, but you don't typically know.
But then the next unknown will be the Wyoming power plant, right? If
Exactly.
If those rules change,
Yep.
unless we can get grandfathered in.
Well, right now with the political winds, maybe if things are delayed long enough where you get a new president, but right now you've got the political winds blowing against coal, and the EPA is going after coal plants, and ours is a relatively old plant right now. It's 35 years old. It probably easily could run 50 years, but it's right in that bad sweet spot of the EPA where they say you either have to invest a ton of money to clean it up, or if you agree to shut it down in 15 years, you don't have to do anything. And from the economics that we've seen so far, it's going to be more advantageous to put in the equipment, the cleanup equipment, and run it longer than it will be to build anything new. So I think what's going to happen is in the near future, in the next year or two, might even be earlier than that, they're going to say we have to make a huge investment in that coal plant, and then that's going to increase your rates probably another.
Is this going to
5
be
to
another
10.
Big Stone problem in terms of, you mentioned the political winds, but, Big Stone was going to be cleaned up, doubled capacity, and it still didn't work. Are we looking at the possibility of that type of situation?
Well, Big Stone was a new plant that, never got off the ground.
Well, we were
basically-
also looking at cleaning up the old plant.
And they're going to be doing that too. That's not us, that's Otter Tail, but they're faced with the same regulations that the Wyoming plant is. And, it's just, you read the papers about coal and a lot of coal plants shutting down. It just doesn't look good for coal right now.
Still see a lot of it going south
Yeah.
every day through Moorhead.
Well, it's still, it was 50% of our energy supply, and now I think it's about 33%. So there's actually a lot of old, dirty coal plants that have shut down already. So, from the standpoint of cleaning up the air and the environment, that's a good thing. But it is going to put upward pressure on rates because because coal was inexpensive. Next to hydro, coal is probably the next. So anyway, that's a lot of discussion under purchase power.
Bill,
Yep.
it sounds like you're saying that's probably the minimum, that it's going to, or that you expect it potentially could be even higher than that
For
the increases.
Yeah, the big increase that we'll be dealing with is, from my understanding from talking to Tom Heller, is for next year. So, the Finance Committee of MRES is going to be talking about whether to use some reserves, some of their reserves to hold things down, or whether they phase it over 3 years. But in talking to him, Tom was thinking leaving year 2 and year 3 the way they are, so 3.5, and then dealing with the transmission change this year, which, again, at their board level, they'll have to decide how they're going to phase that in. But it's more than double that for the first year. So,
Did I just agree to be in the budget committee again?
Yes, you did. And it's an irreversible kind of a decision on your part, just so we understand each other. It's like an irrevocable trust. Okay, go ahead, Bill.
yeah, so I mean, you know, so we will be looking at things really closely in order to minimize that impact for next year. So it is going to make the discussions on the transfer, I think, very interesting, because this is one of those years where, faced with what we're faced with, we would be going to the city and saying, you know, this is not the year to provide an additional transfer. That's, you know, they're faced with things as well. So, I mean, they're not going to like to hear that.
I mean, this is a perfect storm because the city, this is going to be a tough year for them in 2015. And from what it sounds like right now, it may be one for us as well, so.
Right.
So does that make the November 12th meeting for the public rate hearing actually possible?
Well, I think you'll know from MRES some indication in September, and then definitely by October, they'll have made their decision. So the Budget Committee typically meets and does a lot of work in between the 2 October meetings. So, I mean, by the end of October, I think you'll be ready to say what you need to say.
Because we need 30 days, right, between the rate
Yes.
hearing and the rates?
Yep. That's why we normally do it, so that it takes effect on January 1st.
And at the rate hearing, we basically say, you know, here's what we're looking at. You know, we've got this pretty much solidified, but things could change before December, and then we set our rates. So, I mean, you can still, you've got a little bit of flexibility even after you do your rate hearing. But we'll outline all this at the rate hearing and go through it and talk about it. And, I mean,
During our last rate hearing, we had a rather lengthy and well-documented report from one of our major customers who indicated they'd closed plants in other locations when their cost of production got to be X number of dollars per bushel or cents per bushel. With these anticipated rate increases, is there any way that we can meet with them or get numbers on how close we're getting to the numbers that cause them to make similar decisions or bad decisions in other locations? Because I mean, all of this impacts not only everybody sitting at home, but it certainly impacts our large customers, and it certainly impacts those who may no longer be large customers when they get these kinds of increases. So can we somehow try to quantify that with our key
Yeah.
large customers?
we do, and Dennis typically sends out a letter to all of our large customers just to make sure they're aware and have been communicated. And then, of course, he calls a number of those as well.
I'm going to suggest that we may want to do some one-on-one with these
Yep.
large customers
Well, and
beyond correspondence.
I've talked to this one too about the expansion possibilities in just this last week. And by October, they think they'll have a decision. And, you know, we talked about rates and that type of thing as well, so.
Okay.
I don't want to leave out water. On page 3 of 4 is some discussion about the water division, water capital improvements, the transfer payments, and rates. So, I mean, the Budget Committee will be getting into that in a lot of detail. Last couple of years, of course, we've stepped up the water main replacement program. We did a big study, a big plan, and we are increasing the amount of water main replacement that we're doing. And, you know, that's putting some dent in the amount of water main that's out there that's going to give us problems, but it's also costly as well. So we're watching that real close.
Maybe running about $1 million a mile? A little less? Yeah, and we have about 40, 45 bad miles in the ground, right? So big exchange there.
Other than that, I mean, if there's other questions, I mean, we'll be, yeah, other than that,
How'd you like to play, Mrs. Lincoln?
yeah.
I see in here you indicate also that there's some wages and benefits payments, and I know Les had asked earlier if he'd be willing to serve on the Human Resources Committee, and I think he indicated willingness, so I think we should change that to indicate that Les will serve on that committee. I see it's brought up in Bill's. Then we'll try to find a job for Mr. Rogal as soon as possible, too. So. Les?
With John's background and current employment, I would see he would be an asset to the Economic Development Authority, and if you want to move me to the HR committee, I'd be perfectly willing to give up the Economic Development Authority if John would be willing to do that.
Would you like to consider that?
And if you
As
want,
our-
if you and I want to talk before
Why-
you
yeah,
make
why
that
don't you?
decision, I'd be happy to do that as well.
He'll be absent for a while because of some other issues he's got going on, but that might be a good idea.
Yeah, and I'll continue until
'Cause
you're ready.
I think these two gentlemen, to my left and my right, have enough on their plate right now, too, to keep them busy.
Exactly.
Yes,
Yeah,
and yes, it is irrevocable.
I move to accept item 11.
Okay, is there a second?
Aye, second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, the same sign. That motion carries. As I look at our agenda, that brings us down to the closed meeting to go into executive session. The meeting will now be closed for executive session as permitted by Minnesota statute, section 13D05, subdivision 3C, to consider offers for the purchase or acquisition of property along 32nd Avenue South in West Fargo for the relocation of our 115 kV transmission line. Mr. Bolger, do you anticipate us coming out and having to take any action?
No, I don't.
Okay. If that's the case, I would accept a motion to go into closed session and to adjourn the meeting at the end of the closed session without further action.
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are now in closed session. Thank you, everybody.